Welcome to the Red Sneaker Writers Podcast. News, interviews, and writing tips for people who are serious about having a writing career and want some practical knowledge to help them achieve it. Your host is the nationally best-selling author of more than 50 books, William Bernhardt.
Hello, sneakers, and welcome back to the podcast. Hey, guess what? My new novel, Shameless, has a #1 bestseller flag on Amazon. I was so excited. I'm not really exactly sure what it's #1 of, but whatever. It's better than being 512th, right? And speaking of WriterCon, which we weren't, but you knew I would. So speaking of our annual writers conference, we have added, 9 new speakers, new presenters to the roster, as if we didn't already have enough already. We've added 9 new ones, mostly authors. I think they'll be on the website by the time this podcast goes out. We've got authors now covering literally every imaginable genre. I probably shouldn't say that because then somebody will think of some genre that some sub class I haven't thought of. But we got science fiction, fantasy, mystery, thriller, suspense, romance, women's fiction, humor, literary fiction, and we've got nonfiction covered too, but I'll talk about that next time. Point is, if you're looking for a way to get the knowledge you need to take your writing career to the next level, I'm prejudiced, but I think this is a golden opportunity. The conference is Labor Day weekend. That's September 2nd through 5th this year. And please check our website to learn more about it. That's writercon.com, WRITERCON.com. And now it's April. Jesse, are you ready for this? Do you have any vicious April Fool's pranks planned, or?
No, it's just, getting prepared for Passover time. So I've already begun eating the matzah, so my April diet is it's going well so far.
Sounds good. My special guest today is Deborah Falaye, a Nigerian Canadian young adult author. She grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, where she spent her time devouring African literature, she says, and pestering her grandfather for folktales. And she mentions tricking her grandfather into watching Passions every night. I kind of remember Passions. Jesse, you're usually my go-to science fiction fantasy guide. Do you even know what we're talking about here?
I assume it's an old television show.
If it's the one I think she's talking about, it's kind of a supernatural soap opera, kind of a dark shadows for the more modern era. But I'll let her talk about it. She may know more about it than me. Deborah's first novel is called Blood Scion, which some are calling Hunger Games meets Black Panther. Here's the tagline, what you read when you turn over the hardcover and read the back cover. It says, "This is what they deserve. They wanted me to be a monster. I will be the worst monster they ever created." Not bad, huh? Don't you want to read it already? Deborah is living the dream of many aspiring red sneaker writers, so I want to talk to her all about that experience. But first, the news. This first story I've got seems strangely timely, given all that's been going on in the world of late, because this has to do with an author losing her nomination for a prestigious literary prize after basically an online dust-up. This is about Lauren Hugh, the author of Leaving Isn't the Hardest Thing, which has been a New York Times bestseller on the nonfiction list. It's a collection of essays, but she recently lost her nomination for the Lambda Prize. Lambda, of course, being an organization in support of the LGBTQ community. The trouble began when the author started tweeting in defense of another author, a friend of hers, who has a forthcoming novel called The Men. The plot of The Men is that all people with a Y chromosome, what we have traditionally called male, but of course, in these non-binary gender days, that's a little different. Anyway, everybody with a Y chromosome mysteriously disappears from the face of the earth. And it has attracted early criticism from the transgender community. Now, Jesse, I'm willing to bet, is thinking this sounds a lot like Why the Last Man, the graphic novel series from Brian Vaughan, which became a one season television series. And you would be right. But uh, here's the difference. I read the original, graphic novels when they came out. I thought they were brilliant. And the plot was basically all men except one have disappeared. But when they did the television series, they modified that somewhat, acknowledging that there are some people out there, particularly in the trans community, who have Y chromosomes but are not, what we define as traditionally male, or consider themselves non-binary, or something along those lines. Anyway, so Lambda Literary, the LGBTQ organization, released a statement. It's not so much about the books as it is about her online behavior. And now I'm quoting, in a series of now deleted tweets. We've heard that a lot lately, haven't we? Now deleted tweets. It's like an indictment in and of itself. The author exhibited what we believe to be a troubling hostility towards transgender critics and trans allies, and used her substantial platform, due in part to her excellent book, to harmfully engage with readers and critics. As an LGBTQ organization, we cannot knowingly reward individuals who exhibit disdain and disrespect for the autonomy of an entire segment of the community we have committed ourselves to supporting. Well, is there anyone in the audience who isn't already thinking not only about this author, but of course about the Will Smith, Chris Rock dust up at the Oscars last weekend? The world is very concerned right now about how people resolve disputes, and whether violence or violent words, or I don't know. Jesse, what do you think about all this?
I mean, the majority of the time when someone gets in trouble for just like a Twitter fight, I'm normally
Right,
like, listen, it's not a great venue for having discussion. Like,
right.
emotions get riled. I'm more about what people like do in their actual lives.
Hmm.
On the other hand, if you are arguing with people who are arguing for more rights for people, like, you're usually gonna be wrong. So maybe take a step back in those situations. So I think it's fine for an organization who promotes what this organization does to
Mhm.
do this. It is strange now that every conversation we've ever had with someone online could be used against us at
Right.
one point. On the other hand, we should watch what we say and,
Well, especially
not.
these days. But they're basically
Yeah.
taking. I mean, she'd already earned the nomination. They acknowledge that her book is excellent, but now they're withdrawing it. I meant inevitably. I mentioned Will Smith because, of course, as I'm sure you know, many people thought that his Oscar should have been taken back or never given. And this morning we learned that he was actually asked to leave the ceremony but refused. Is this a different situation somehow?
I mean, it's similar in the sense that it's about who has power and who doesn't,
Right.
and how people use that power. So, as a popular author, she used her Twitter power to argue with people who were probably just trying to point out that maybe uh, she wasn't handling it as well as she could.
Right,
So,
right. Well, and online dust-ups are pointless. You'll never persuade everyone, but you might really do damage to your careers, red sneaker riders. I mean, even J.K. Rowling, possibly the wealthiest author on the face of the earth, has suffered as a result of her. And every time I read one, whether you agree or you disagree, I just think, why speak? Why can't you keep your thoughts to yourself? It seems crazy.
I would say like it didn't really it hurt her in the sense that people dislike her now, but she's still uber rich. So
Yeah.
if you have horrible things to say, wait until you're the richest, one of the richest people in the world. Uh,
Wait until it just doesn't matter
yes,
anymore.
and friend of the pod, Sharon Jenkins does point out things like this don't give people space for personal growth. So if you tell someone what they've done in the past was bad and don't give them the opportunity to fix it, then we are just saying that we all get judged for the worst thing we say or do.
Right. That seems to way too often be true. All right, item number 2, quick story, and this is about Writer Beware, which I've mentioned on the podcast before. It's a great site that helps writers avoid scams and unethical actors in publishing, vanity presses, scam presses, and sadly, a lot of that still goes on even now in the internet age. Anyway, they're still alive and well, but they have moved to a new site. They've got a new domain, and now it's a WordPress based site. All the old content and new is still there. And I recommend that Red Sneaker Writers put this on their frequently visited sites, especially if you're thinking about doing some kind of deal with some publisher you've never heard of before. Please visit this site first. It's writerbeware.blog, and I'll put that website in the show notes. All right, let's get on to the interview. I'm very anxious to talk to Deborah, or talk about her. That sounds like we're going to leave her off stage and just talk about her, doesn't it? I'm anxious to talk to Deborah Falaye. Her first novel, published just earlier this month, is based on the legends and mythologies rooted in her Nigerian Yoruba culture. Deborah, welcome to the podcast.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Okay, traditional first question. If you could give the writers out there one piece of advice, what would it be?
So this is something that I was told a long time ago, and it really stuck with me like throughout the duration of like me working on Blood Scion. And that is that publishing is not a race, it's a journey. Because I remember when I first started out, and there's this like almost like a need to finish the book right away, to get it out right away, to get it published right away. And I think in having that like that kind of mentality, you forget what like writing is about, you forget what the book's about, and you barely do any revisions, and it's just it just becomes like your whole world, it revolves around just getting this story out there. And that's nice and all, but I think taking your time to hone your craft, taking your time to revise, taking your time to research like agents and editors, and just get to know more about like the publishing industry, I think that really goes a long way. And so I would probably say that's my advice that I would give to a lot of like aspiring authors for sure.
Yeah, no, that's terrific advice. All right, tell us about this new book that's hovering over my head. Tell us about Blood Scion.
Yeah, well, I mean, Blood Scion is, that's like my new book that just came out this month, actually. And it's a YA fantasy, which is inspired by my Nigerian Yoruba culture, as well as the war on children. And the story basically follows a young girl by the name of Sloan, who is descended from the ancient Orisha gods. And on her 15th birthday, gets drafted into the very military that's been hunting down her people and her kind for centuries. So now a soldier in the army, her goal isn't only to survive, but it's also to take down the army from within, even if it means becoming the very monster she hates.
Yeah. Let me remind, I can see there's some people watching this podcast live, this recording live. If you have any questions for Deborah, please type them into the chat box and we'll make sure she answers them. Oh, we'll try. I don't suppose I can force you to answer them, but we can make sure they're asked, put it that way. So you live in Toronto, right, Deborah?
Yeah, I did.
I actually lived in Toronto for a while too, for a year while I was in college. I went to U of T, however, had a great time. But obviously this book isn't set there. So how did you research this novel?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Nigeria. So I actually moved from Nigeria to Canada when I was 12. And just in growing up there, I say like my first inspiration for this book really has to deal with the stories that my grandmother told me back when I was in Nigeria growing up. And a lot of that is steeped in like the Orisha mythology and just like this pantheon of gods and goddesses that was rooted in like our culture and our spirituality. So in 2012, when I got this idea for Blood Scion, that was really the first thing that jumped at me. I wanted to write a story that was inspired by these gods that really, showcased like this spirituality and this culture in a way that like I knew best. And then fast forward to 2014, like 2 years later, there was an incident that happened that caused this huge global frenzy called the Bring Back Our Girls, and that was when a bunch of girls had gotten kidnapped from a school in Nigeria, and a lot of people were talking about it because it became like a huge topic. And I remember thinking about the situation that these girls had gone through. Obviously, being Nigerian myself, it really hit close to home. And I was just thinking about, what it is that's happening to these girls and how, like, what was their journey like, after the kidnapping and what really happened to them.
Right.
That sent me into this spiral of like doing this research on child soldiers and, just the war on children. And the more that I read, like that was like, those stories were really difficult for me. Like I had such a hard time with a lot of the things I read. And it was also around the same time when I was still trying to figure out Blood Scion. And I think that just kind of merged into my book because I felt like, the whole situation with child soldiers is not something that we hear a lot about. So I really wanted to shed some light on that, as much as I could. And I spent a lot of time researching and reading memoirs and, just trying to understand exactly like just this reality that's so different from our own. And yeah, the Blood Scion just kind of just evolved from that.
Well, hats off to you. That's got to be one of the least pleasant things to research I can imagine. So,
It really was.
how'd you go about? How'd you get inside Sloane's head? How'd you create this character?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I knew that I wanted her to be a descendant of the gods, and Shango was like my favorite Orisha growing up. So I knew that I wanted her to have the powers that were related to his, which is like, he's this fire god and he's got this larger than life personality. And I really knew that I wanted her to like embody like those aspects of like who he was. I think the moment when I started to dig deeper into the backstory of like the child soldiers, that's when the character really became fully fleshed for me. That's when I kind of really got a good grasp of like, okay, this is who she is. Like, I know what she's fighting for. She's going to be this young soldier who's, being like forcefully, forced into like this military. But she's also going to have something that she's fighting for. And that's, to hold on to her humanity, to survive, to get a good understanding of like what happened to her mother, and also just to like reclaim back everything that's been taken from her and her people. And so I think just in putting all of that together, there's something that I do call like it's like a character study. And I tend to like use like this GMC chart, which is like the goal, motivation, and conflict. So I really spend a lot of time like just like analyzing like what my character's goal is, what her motivation is, what the conflict is. And I just sort of like build the story around that. Like, what is it that she wants? What is it that she's fighting for? And yeah, that's kind of like how I built her up.
Wow. Okay, now I'm going to ask the question I bet you've heard before from publishers or critics or somebody else. Is this, this is dark stuff. Is this too bleak for YA?
I mean, I thought a lot about that when I was writing the book. I thought a lot about, would anyone even want to read this because it's so dark, and because of the topic itself that I was choosing to focus on. But I think for me with Blood Scion, it's like, despite all the darkness in the book, you're still going on a journey with a girl that's learning to embrace who she is, which I think is something that a lot of YA readers, attach themselves to. Because a lot of young kids, I remember growing up, like, I didn't know who I was, and I was still trying to figure out who I was, especially in a world that was also trying to tell me, no, this is who you are, this is who you should be. And that's the message behind Blood Scion, because you really get to follow this young girl who, at the start of the book, she's being told who she is dangerous, who she is bad, who she is worthless. And you really get to see that journey as she go on this journey to embrace who she is, to realize that, you know what, the world is wrong about who I am. I'm not worthless. I'm not, I'm not a bad person. Like I'm someone worth, like I'm someone who deserves to live, and I think that's such a strong message for a lot of YA readers to hold on to. And so I would say, yeah, there's a lot of darkness, there's a lot of brutality, but there's still a strong message behind the book. And it definitely has a tiny little bit of hope in the story.
Right. But there are also pretty brutal depictions of training and warfare, and what I think is really impressive, the physical and psychological impact of war, right? Was that hard to put in a book that, again, is targeted for young people?
It was hard to put in the book. It was hard because I wanted to get it right. Obviously, this is not a reality that I've lived through. So that was one of the harder aspects of it for me. It wasn't necessarily about putting it in the book. It was just about making sure it wasn't gratuitous, because sometimes you read books that, you feel like the violence is just there for the sake of the violence. And I didn't want to do that because the subject matter really meant a lot to me. So I knew if I was going to touch on this, I didn't want to butcher it. I didn't want to get it wrong. I don't want you to come out of the book like, oh yeah, she just put the violence in there for the sake of it. Like that would mean that I've done such a terrible job of such an important topic. So that was kind of, I guess, what my mindset was in digging into a lot of the brutal aspects of the story. Just like, you have to get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And this must have helped with the research. You're actually fluent in Yoruba, right? Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that come up a lot in Toronto, or?
I mean, no, I speak it mostly with my parents, my brother. And just, family members. I don't think I've actually ran into, I have family members and whatnot, but yeah, like that, I do speak Yoruba and I'm very fluent in it.
Oh, that's nice. Well, I see that we have another question. I love this phrase, Jesse. Thank you, friend of the podcast. I'm going to remember that one. I'm not sure why, because I know for a fact that she lives in Texas. But anyway, she's asking, what is the writer's market like in Canada?
That's interesting. I feel like when I first started writing Blood Sign, I had no idea that you could be anywhere and get published. So I, being in Toronto, I just kept wondering to myself, like, how, like, do I have to move to the US to actually do this? But I think that's like what's good about like publishing is like you really get stories from like anywhere. It doesn't really matter where you're at. So I think because of that, I haven't really had to think about what the writer's market is in Canada, just because my path to like publication, the type of publication I chose is very much traditional. And with traditional publishing, it's really just about getting an agent and getting a publisher and whatever, regardless of where you're at. But I think maybe like someone who was like an indie author might kind of have a better grasp of what the market is in Canada. Maybe.
Well, I just checked the Spine. You're being published by Harper, right? Which, of course, is one of the big five. I bet they have office, well, in New York, obviously, but I bet they have offices in Canada.
Yeah.
And the parent corporation is in Australia. So where did you send this? Where was it initially published? Where's your editor?
The US.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's in the US. But yeah, like HCC Frenzy, which is like, I guess, a division of Canada, is the one who published it a division of Harper is the one who published it in the US. And then we've got Harper 360 YA, who's like the one publishing in like the UK. So
yeah, that's well, I think this book could easily have appeal all over the place. And I'm sure they do too, since they're the ones publishing. Here's another question from people listening in. What challenges have you faced getting published?
Okay, so it took 10 years to get here. I started working on Blood Sign in 2012, and 10 years later, 2022, we're getting published. I would say probably the biggest challenge I had was speed. I'm very much like a slow writer. Like I'm crazy slow.
How slow is slow? A page a day?
Oh my God. If I got a page a day, I'd be happy. That's how
Really?
slow I am. Yeah. I
Is
feel
that
like
because you got a day job or you're just slow?
I'm just slow. I'm just slow. It's really weird. It took me a long time to get to a point of accepting that, because in the beginning, that used to be such a difficult thing for me. Like I thought, I can't do this because I'm slow. Like I can't do this because I'm a slow writer. Like I like there were days when like I would get like 100 words out, like after like hours of trying to write. And I was just like, does this mean I'm not like, it's like this isn't the path for me to go? Like, does this mean like, I shouldn't be an author? So it really took a long time to overcome that. And just like accept the fact that, everyone has their own process. People have ways that they write, and whatever works for you is what works for you.
Right.
One thing I've been told is that despite the slowness of like my writing, my drafts end up being, they're not bad. Like my first drafts are not bad. So I think maybe that's just the cause and effect of that, maybe. But yeah, that's definitely a challenge.
That makes sense to me. Well, so what is your writing process then? Do you get up in the morning and go straight to it, or are you a night owl, or how much time do you spend, since you're making it sound like if you're not even doing one page, then that's like under 200 words a day. What's your writing process, Deborah?
Oh my God, I spend hours of my day. Like I wake up and I just go, and then I break for like evening, and then once everyone's like asleep, I'm awake. So I'm not much of a morning person, but when I wake up, that's what I do. I eat my breakfast and I just get to writing. I try to put in like probably 8 to like 9 hours during the day.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll put in like another 4 to 5 hours at night. So it's a crazy schedule, but it's what works for me. Huh?
I'm sorry. Do you outline in advance? Are you a pantser or a planner?
No, I'm a huge plotter. I have hundreds of pages of outlines. I outline a lot, and I feel like I've gotten to understand now that maybe that's probably why it takes me a long time, because my outlines are usually really fast. Like I write my outlines really, really fast. And I think by the time I'm ready to start writing, I know the story really, really well. I understand the characters. I know the plot. I know everything about what I'm doing. And I think that's maybe why, like where the slow thing comes from, because now I'm drafting and I'm just kind of like, well, I'm not really figuring it out anymore. I'm just now writing the story. So I spend a lot of time on like my sentences and my paragraphs.
Well,
it's a bit chaotic.
That makes for good writing, though. Well, I'll ask later about your future plans. But anyway, I see another question in the chat box. Did you experience writer's block?
Oh, I do. I do so much, and I still do. One thing I carried with me throughout the 10 years of writing Blood Scion was doubt. I am someone who, and I'm still learning to like let it go and just be like, this is like not like imposter syndrome is, I guess, is what we call it. Like it's okay, like you actually did it and you can keep doing it, but there's that doubt of like not feeling like you're good enough or your words are good enough, or the things or your story is good enough. I remember with Blood Scion, like I just kept telling myself like, this is not good, this is not good, this is, and I would just keep tossing drafts like and just keep throwing the stories away, because when I read them, it just wasn't clicking in my head that this was a good story. And I guess that's really what, for me, like what my version of like writer's block is. Because when I fall into those doubts, then it's really hard for me to break into my story in the way that I want to. It's hard for me to keep writing. I could sit on like a page like for a week and just keep thinking to myself, no. And I find that what really helps me is to take a break from it. And then I start reading. I pick up a book and I start reading. And I read these books and I'm like, I can write these sentences too. And
Not
I
the
think
same, but yeah.
that switches that brain, like that thing in my brain where it's just like, yes,
Yeah.
you can write this sentences, so go do it. you know?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's terrific. So you said you're an outliner, a planner, a plotter, that's with a T, not a D. Do you have any strategies or approaches for, holding on to the reader's interest? Not that I think anyone is likely to get bored with your book, but just in general, how do you keep the readers engaged?
Yeah. So what my version, like the way I tend to outline my books is I really break it down into the structural outlines, which is and I use like the 4-act structure, which
Cool.
is, yeah, 4. So you have like, like the act 1, which is like the beginning of the story and, whatever. But then I break down my act 2. You know how usually you have the traditional like 3 acts?
Yeah,
I break down my act 2
yeah.
into 2. So I have like one half of my act 2, which focuses on like, a new goal that the character is now like, she now has to like deal with, or she now has to like overcome. And then there's my midpoint right there. And then I switch from that because I'm now at the midpoint. It's like now she's probably discovered something, right? And so now it's like whatever she's discovered is now going to propel her into the second half of like my act 2. And then you get like the traditional ending with the climax and whatever. But that's really how I structure my outlines. Like everything is just like broken down into acts, and I just try to put a lot of like the plot, the motivation, the conflict into each act.
Fantastic. All right, another question. How did you determine your target audience?
I mean, I've always I've always read YA. So for me, I've always thought that I was gonna write in YA. Obviously, with Blood Sign, it's a bit tricky, right? Because, like you said, the book is pretty dark. So you kind of have to think to yourself, like, could this work in the adult space? And probably, maybe it could. But I think because of the theme in the book and what the character's journey was, that really helped solidify for me that this is YA.
Sure. All right, one more question from the chat box. What advice do you have for new writers?
I mean, other than the, other than that one, I would say maybe read a lot. One thing that's really helped me, and I know a lot of people say this, but it really is true, is pick up books that you love and just read. Again, like I said, like when I'm kind of dealing with writer's block, I take a step back, I pick up a book, I start reading, and not only does that motivate you because you're reading the stories and you're like, I can do the same thing, but for me, I call it like just filling up your word well, in a sense. It's like, you reading these words like they're in your mind, the way like other authors have constructed like sentences or the turns of phrases that they've used. Like I remember when I first started out in 2012, and I have like a folder of this that I just found recently, and I was reading and I was like, wow, like look how far you've come. But I would write sentences or like little phrases that I read in books, and I would put them in like a Microsoft Word, and I had like 10, 20 pages of just these phrases. And I also write where those books come from, like where those phrases came from, like where I got them from in like all these different books. And then every night I would read those phrases to myself. I just read it because I love this, and I try to analyze in my head, like, why do I love this? Why does this work? And I mean, it worked for me because I didn't know how to write when I first started Blood Sign.
Yeah, taught yourself, right? Give time.
Yeah. Oh man, I believe that. Like one page at a time, one word at a time, one chapter at a time.
That's what first books do, I think. You can do exercises and take classes, but it's that first book when you learn how to read. And probably when you got your first edit back from your editor at HarperCollins, you really learned how to write. Am I correct?
Yeah.
That was one of the most initially horrifying, but eventually educational experiences of mine. When I got that manuscript dripping with red ink, I know. Well, now that this book is behind you, and I assume that you're planning something else, what themes do you think you were playing with in this book? Or are there things that you're maybe not even conscious of as you wrote it that are clear to you now? Talk about it thematically, if you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that came to me after I wrote, like, I think I was on my second draft, when I realized, I'm like, this book is actually dealing with colonization. Interesting enough, like, it's right there, but I didn't see it with the first draft or the second draft. And I credit this book called Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, which is the first book I read back in Nigeria when I was a little kid, and I didn't understand what it was that this book was even trying to say, but I just knew I loved it so much. And then when I was in high school, I picked it up again and I read it because I had to write a paper on it, and it stuck with me. But I still wasn't thinking about the parallels between Things Fall Apart and Blood Sign until that second or third draft, where I was reading it again. I was like, wait a minute, that's what this author is trying to say. That's like the themes of colonization, just this idea behind how colonization, like the impacts that colonization leaves behind, like the legacy of it and how it affects not just, the continent, not just the community, but just like individual at an individual level, how you as the main character interact with like just this, brutal legacy that colonization leaves behind. And that's the same thing in Blood Sign. And that really made it feel all the more special for me when I realized that. So that's like one of it. And I think, the second one that a lot of people have been talking about a lot, and I think it's a running theme in Blood Sign, and it will be a running theme in book 2, like the sequel that wraps this up, is this idea of survival versus humanity. That battle between both. Like when you have a main character who's forced into such a brutal life, how does she, where does the wind blow her, in terms of how far will she go to survive? And is she still able to hold on to her humanity at the end of it? I think Blood Sign, for me, I really want to answer that with this series. So that's definitely like a running theme with book. That's going to be in book 2 too.
Well, you anticipated my next question. There's going to be is this a trilogy? Is this something that could go on forever? How are you envisioning this?
I mean, it's a duology right now. The world is really big, and I would definitely, obviously, love to play in this world with more stories in the future. Hopefully, we'll see. But right now, it is definitely a duology. So the book 2 wraps it up.
2 books under contract?
Yeah.
And then what?
I don't know.
That's not really a question.
I don't know.
Deborah, it's been a delight. Thanks so much for being on this podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. This was great. Thank you.
Bye-bye. All right, everybody. Let me just say a few parting words. As I mentioned before, our annual writers conference, WriterCon, will have authors, agents, editors, publishers, book marketers, author assistants. Did I miss something? If I did, they're probably going to be there anyway. We've got over 70 sessions, over 50 speakers, chances for you to meet people who share your dreams, your goals, and know something about how to achieve them. You can network, you can get the connections and knowledge you need to build your career or expand your career. And right now, you could take advantage of the early bird price, but we are getting very close to the deadline for that, so the cutoff date. So if you think you might be interested, please visit the website. Jesse's got it right up there on the screen, writercon.com. It'll be in the show notes too. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention to you that the third book in the Kinsey Rivera legal thriller series written by me, Shameless. Yes, that's the one with the #1 flag. It is now on sale. So, sneakers, until next time, keep writing. And remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. See you next time.